In the dim light of a November dawn in 1922, a solitary figure boarded a British warship anchored in the Bosphorus, his footsteps echoing faintly against the wooden deck as the engines hummed to life. Mehmed VI, the last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, cast one final glance at the silhouette of Istanbul. The city that had stood as the heart of his realm for centuries. The air was crisp with the salt of the sea, mingling with the distant calls of seagulls and the muffled toll of church bells from the ancient quarters. This was no triumphant departure, but a quiet exile, marking the end of an empire that had once stretched from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Arabia. As the ship slipped away into the misty horizon, the weight of 600 years seemed to dissolve into the waves, leaving behind a fractured land where the echoes of grandeur still whispered through the ruins. Yet, this collapse did not erupt in a single cataclysmic moment. It unfolded like a slow poison seeping through the veins of a once mighty body, invisible at first, but inexorable in its grip. The Ottoman Empire, born from the ashes of Byzantine defeat in 1453, had risen as a colossus, blending the traditions of Turkic nomads with the sophistication of Persian courts and the discipline of Islamic law. Under sultans like Suleiman the Magnificent, its armies thundered across continents, while its scholars preserved the flames of knowledge in grand libraries, and its merchants traded silks and spices in bustling bazaars that smelled of cardamom and incense. But by the 19th century, the empire's vast territories encompassing diverse peoples from Arabs to Greeks, Armenians to Kurds, began to strain under the pressures of a changing world where European powers sharpened their ambitions like blades in the forge. Imagine the streets of Istanbul in the mid-1800s, alive with the clamor of daily existence that masked the underlying fragility of the empire's structure. Horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobblestone roads, their wheels grinding against the stone as vendors hawked fresh figs and roasted chestnuts, their voices rising in a symphony of Turkish, Greek, and Arabic tongues. In the Grand Topkapi Palace, the Sultan held court amid opulent chambers adorned with intricate tilework that gleamed under flickering oil lamps, while eunuchs moved silently through shadowed corridors guarding the secrets of the harem where whispers of intrigue floated like smoke. Beyond the capital, in the fertile plains of Anatolia, peasants tilled the soil under the relentless sun, their hands calloused from harvesting wheat that fed the empire's armies, unaware that distant factories in England were churning out goods that would soon undercut their livelihoods. In Cairo's labyrinthine markets, the scent of jasmine mingled with the acrid smoke of hookahs as Egyptian notables discussed politics in hushed tones, their loyalties divided between the local pasha and the distant sultan. Life pulsed with the rhythm of prayer calls echoing from minarets at dawn, the sizzle of lamb on spits in roadside inns, and the rhythmic beat of drums during festivals that celebrated the empire's multicultural tapestry. Yet, beneath this veneer of normalcy, the air carried a subtle tension, like the distant rumble of thunder on a clear day, as European ideas of nationalism began to infiltrate coffee houses and schools, planting seeds of division in minds once bound by shared allegiance to the caliphate. The empire's subjects went about their routines, merchants haggling over bolts of cloth dyed in vibrant hues, artisans hammering silver into delicate jewelry, families gathering around low tables for meals of pilaf and yogurt, oblivious to how these everyday acts were threads in a fabric slowly unraveling at the edges. The first cracks appeared not in grand battles, but in the quiet ledgers of treasury officials, where ink stains revealed mounting debts that choked the empire's finances like vines overtaking an ancient wall. By the late 18th century, repeated wars with Russia had drained the coffers, leaving behind fields scarred by cannon fire, and villages echoing with the wails of widows, their homes reduced to smoldering ruins under skies heavy with smoke. The loss of Crimea in 1783 sent ripples through the palace, where advisors murmured in dimly lit chambers about the need for reform, their voices laced with apprehension as the Sultan's decrees echoed hollowly down marble halls. In the Balkans, Greek merchants in port cities like Smyrna whispered of independence, their conversations drowned out by the crash of waves against the docks, but carrying the scent of rebellion that would soon ignite. The air in these regions grew thick with unease, as local leaders chafed under Ottoman taxes, their grievances festering like untreated wounds amid the routine of harvest seasons and religious pilgrimages. Yet, no one fully grasped the gathering storm. The empire's vast bureaucracy continued to function, with couriers galloping across dusty roads carrying missives, sealed with wax, and janissaries drilling in courtyards to the sharp commands of officers. Subtle shifts in trade routes bypassed Ottoman ports, leaving warehouses half empty and sailors idling on quays where the creak of idle ships foretold economic decay. In the cafes of Damascus, intellectuals debated Enlightenment ideas over steaming cups of coffee, their words hanging in the air like the haze from nargilés, unknowingly fueling aspirations that would challenge the Sultan's authority. The collapse did not begin with chaos, it began quietly, in the overlooked details of eroding power and unspoken doubts. As the 19th century progressed, the empire's attempts at renewal only highlighted its deepening vulnerabilities, like a grand edifice patched with mismatched stones that threatened to crumble under their own weight. The Tanzimat reforms of 1839 promised equality and modernization, echoing through the halls of government buildings where scribes hurriedly copied edicts under the flicker of candlelight, their quills scratching against parchment in a bid to stem the tide of decline. Yet in the provinces, these changes stirred resentment. Christian subjects in the Balkans felt the stirrings of national identity, their church bells ringing with a new defiance, amid landscapes dotted with Ottoman forts that now seemed relics of a fading era. The air in Belgrade and Athens grew charged with anticipation, as secret societies met in hidden cellars. The damp walls absorbing plots whispered in the dim glow of lanterns, while outside, the routine of market days continued with the haggling over olives and wine. Economic pressures mounted as European banks extended loans with strings attached, their interest rates devouring the empire's revenues like locusts on a field, leaving farmers to face barren harvests and empty granaries. In Istanbul, the Sultan's court buzzed with foreign diplomats, their polished boots clicking on tiled floors as they negotiated concessions that chipped away at sovereignty, the scent of European perfumes clashing with traditional incense. But no one understood what was coming next. The reforms meant to fortify instead exposed fractures as military defeats in the Crimean War of 1853-1856 left battlefields strewn with the fallen, the acrid smell of gunpowder lingering long after the cannons fell silent and soldiers returned home with tales of outdated tactics against modern rifles. The empire's fabric began to tear more visibly in the late 1800s, as nationalist uprisings erupted like sparks from a forge, igniting regions once held in uneasy balance. In the Armenian highlands, villagers went about their daily labor-tending vineyards under the shadow of Mount Ararat, the air filled with the earthy scent of turned soil and ripening grapes while underlying tensions simmered, fueled by unequal treatment and rumors of reform that never fully materialized. Abdul Hamid II's reign brought a semblance of stability through authoritarian control, but his Hamidian regiments patrolled with heavy footsteps, their presence a constant reminder of fragile order amid the silence of suppressed dissent. The young Ottomans, exiled in Europe, plotted in cafes scented with tobacco and espresso, their letters smuggled across borders carrying visions of constitutional rule that would challenge the absolute power echoing from the palace throne. Yet, the Sultan clung to tradition. His decrees issued from opulent rooms where the rustle of silk robes masked the growing isolation, as telegraphs clicked with news of revolts in Crete and Bulgaria, where the cries of the oppressed mingled with the crack of rifles in misty mountains. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late. The 1877 to 1878 Russo-Turkish War carved away more territories, leaving maps redrawn in blood and refugees streaming into cities with tales of horror that hung in the air like fog over the Bosphorus, foretelling greater upheavals yet to come. In 1908, the winds of change swept through the empire with the Young Turk Revolution, a sudden upheaval that shattered the illusion of enduring autocracy like glass under a hammer's blow. From the barracks in Macedonia, officers and intellectuals rose in unison, their demands for constitutional restoration echoing through the streets of where the clamor of crowds drowned out the usual calls to prayer, and the air buzzed with electric excitement, mixed with the salt of the Aegean Sea. Abdul Hamid, too, ensconced in his Yildiz palace, felt the ground shift beneath him as telegrams arrived like urgent whispers, reporting mutinies in marshes, the distant sound of boots on pavement signaling the end of his unchecked rule. The restoration of the 1876 Constitution was proclaimed amid cheers and fireworks that lit the night sky, but beneath the jubilation lurked divisions within the Committee of Union and Progress, their meetings in smoke-filled rooms, fraught with debates that foreshadowed internal strife. In the cafes of Istanbul, patrons discussed the new era over glasses of raki, the anise-flavored liquor burning their throats as sharply as the political fervor burned in their hearts. unaware that this progress would accelerate the empire's fragmentation. The Balkan provinces stirred with renewed vigor as Bulgarian independence was declared mere months later, the peal of bells in Tarnovo carrying across borders like a challenge, while Ottoman garrisons watched helplessly from fortresses echoing with the ghosts of past glories. The Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913 struck like thunderbolts, stripping the empire of its European heartlands in a frenzy of battles that left the air thick with the stench of death and cordite. Armies clashed in the muddy fields of Thrace, where the cries of wounded soldiers mingled with the relentless rain, and cities like Adorn endured sieges that reduced grand mosques to rubble, their minarets crumbling amid the boom of artillery. The Ottoman forces, outmatched by allied Balkan states, retreated in disarray, leaving behind trails of abandoned equipment and refugees fleeing with what little they could carry, their footsteps heavy on roads choked with despair. In Istanbul, the news arrived like a pole, silencing the bustling Grand Bazaar where merchants had once haggled amid the aroma of spices. The 1913 coup by the Young Turks, led by Enver Pasha, seized control in a raid on the Sublime Porte, the gunfire echoing through government halls stained with blood installing a triumph for it that promised revival but delivered only deeper entanglement. Yet amid the ruins no one foresaw the global conflagration that loomed. The empire licked its wounds, its people resuming daily rhythms, fishermen casting nets into the Golden Horn. At dawn the water lapping gently against boats while the seeds of alliance with Germany took root in secret negotiations binding the Ottomans to a fate sealed in the shadows of diplomacy. As Europe plunged into the abyss of World War I, in 1914, the Ottoman Empire's fateful decision to align with the Central Powers emerged from hushed council rooms in Istanbul, where maps unfurled under lamplight revealed strategic gambles that would prove catastrophic. Enver Pasha, with visions of pan-Turkic glory, orchestrated the entry into the war, his orders dispatching fleets to bombard Russian ports, the thunder of naval guns reverberating across the Black Sea like omens of doom. The air in the capital grew tense with mobilization, as young men marched through streets lined with cheering crowds, their boots pounding the pavement while families waved handkerchiefs scented with rosewater, masking tears of foreboding. In the deserts of Arabia, Bedouin tribes stirred uneasily under Ottoman rule, the hot winds carrying whispers of British promises for independence, as Lawrence of Arabia's campaigns ignited revolts that fractured loyalties like cracked earth under the sun. The Gallipoli Peninsula became a hellscape in 1915, where Allied troops stormed beaches amid a hail of bullets, the sea foaming red with blood, and the cliffs echoing with the screams of the dying. Yet Ottoman resilience under Mustafa Kemal repelled the invaders in a Pyrrhic victory that drained resources. But the strain mounted invisibly. Supply lines stretched thin, farms lay fallow as men were conscripted, and the scent of baking bread grew scarce in villages where hunger began to gnaw at the edges of survival. The invisible horrors of the Armenian genocide unfolded in 1915 amid the chaos of war, a dark chapter where orders from the capital set in motion deportations that masked systematic extermination, leaving trails of suffering across Anatolia's rugged landscapes. Families were torn from homes in the dead of night, their cries piercing the silence as they marched into the wilderness, the dust of roads choking their lungs and the relentless sun blistering their skin. Villages once alive with the sounds of children playing and blacksmiths hammering fell eerily quiet, their empty streets haunted by the ghosts of the vanished, while rivers ran with the evidence of atrocities committed in remote valleys. The empire's leaders justified these acts as wartime necessities, but the air hung heavy with denial, as survivors whispered tales in refugee camps where the stench of despair mingled with meager rations. Meanwhile, on the Mesopotamian front, British advances captured Baghdad in 1917, the minarets standing sentinel over streets where Ottoman soldiers retreated amid the wail of muezzins calling the faithful to prayer, their voices lost in the din of defeat. The Arab revolt gained momentum, with Sharif Hussein's forces striking from the dunes, the camel bells jingling like accusations against Ottoman overreach, further eroding control over vast territories. By 1918, the empire's military facade shattered under the weight of unrelenting defeats. As Allied forces pressed from multiple fronts, the air filled with the roar of airplanes and the rumble of tanks that outpaced outdated Ottoman cavalry. In Palestine, the fall of Jerusalem, 2 British troops marked a symbolic blow, the ancient walls witnessing the handover amid the scent of olive groves, and the distant echo of church bells tolling change. Exhaustion permeated the ranks. Soldiers, ragged and famished, deserted in droves, their footsteps fading into the countryside where villages struggled with famine, the silence broken only by the weak cries of the starving. The armistice of Mudras, signed aboard a ship in the Aegean, sealed the empire's capitulation, the scratch of pens on paper resounding like a death knell as occupation forces entered Istanbul, their foreign uniforms a stark intrusion amid the familiar domes and spires. The city, once a beacon of imperial might, now hummed with uncertainty, cafes filled with subdued conversations over tea steeped in bitterness, while the Sultan's palace became a gilded cage, overshadowed by allied warships anchoring in the harbor like predators at rest. The post-war reckoning accelerated the empire's disintegration, as the Treaty of Sèvres, in 1920, carved up remaining territories like a feast for victors, the ink on maps redrawing borders that ignored the cries of displaced peoples. In the halls of Paris, diplomats bartered Ottoman lands, their voices echoing indifference to the human cost, while in Anatolia Kemal rallied nationalists in Ankara, his speeches igniting resistance amid the chill of mountain winds and the crackle of campfires. The Turkish War of Independence erupted from 1919, a gritty struggle where guerrilla fighters ambushed occupiers in rugged terrains, the scent of gunpowder blending with pine forests, and villages became battlegrounds echoing with defiance. Greek advances into Smyrna turned to retreat in flames, the harbor thick with smoke as refugees fled across the sea, their wails carried on the waves like lamentations for a lost era. The empire's diverse subjects faced upheaval. Population exchanges uprooted millions, Greeks and Turks crossing borders with bundles of belongings. The air heavy with sorrow and the dust of forced marshes, reshaping communities in a mosaic of loss. The human toll of the collapse manifested in waves of suffering that rippled through societies, leaving scars etched into the collective memory like inscriptions on weathered stone. Families shattered by war and genocide wandered as refugees, their paths crossing in makeshift camps, where the murmur of multiple languages blended with the sobs of the bereaved, and the cold night air amplified the isolation of exile. In the streets of newly independent states, celebrations mingled with uncertainty, the pop of fireworks contrasting with the quiet grief of those who had lost homes scented with familiar herbs and spices now forever distant. Economic ruin gripped the remnants, markets barren of goods, as inflation soared. The clink of devalued coins, a mocking reminder of former prosperity, while beggars lined avenues, once thronged with prosperous traders. Social fabrics tore as ethnic tensions flared. Villages that had coexisted for generations now, divided by suspicion, the silence between neighbors heavier than words unspoken. Yet, amid the breakdown, seeds of new identities sprouted. In Turkey, Kemal's reforms swept away the old order, banning fezes and introducing Latin script, the scratch of new pens on paper, symbolizing a break from the past. Though the echoes of Ottoman legacy lingered in architecture and cuisine, the long-term echoes of the Ottoman fall reshaped the world map, birthing modern nations from the empire's carcass, in a process fraught with arbitrary lines drawn in distant conference rooms. The Middle East's boundaries etched by Sykes-Picot agreements sowed seeds of conflict that would bloom in later decades. The desert sands, witnessing the rise of mandates where British and French officials imposed rule, their orders clashing with local customs like foreign accents in ancient bazaars. The abolition of the Caliphate in 1924 severed a spiritual link for Muslims worldwide, the announcement rippling through mosques from India to Indonesia, where the call to prayer suddenly carried a note of loss amid the familiar rhythms. Turkey emerged as a secular republic, its cities buzzing with modernization trams rattling along streets, factories humming with machinery yet haunted by the specter of authoritarianism that mirrored the Sultan's grip. In the Balkans, new states forged identities from Ottoman ruins, their festivals incorporating echoes of Turkish music and cuisine, a subtle nod to intertwined histories amid the push for distinct nationalism. The dissolution fostered a vacuum that invited colonial intrusions. The air in Cairo and Damascus, thick with the presence of European administrators whose policies disrupted traditional livelihoods. Farmers tilling fields under new taxes that echoed old grievances. Intellectuals in Beirut salons debated the empire's legacy over coffee scented with cardamom, their words weaving narratives of both oppression and cultural synthesis. While archives preserved Ottoman records and fading ink testaments to administrative prowess, now studied in quiet libraries. The fall accelerated global shifts, contributing to the redrawing of power dynamics that set the stage for future wars. After the empire's end, broken by the stirrings of Arab nationalism and Zionist aspirations in Palestine, where olive trees stood witness to changing sides. Economically, the empire's collapse disrupted trade networks that had linked east and west for centuries, ports like Busra falling silent as routes shifted, the creak of ships giving way to the hum of oil rigs that would define the region's future wealth and woes. Socially, the upheaval displaced artisans and scholars, their knowledge scattered like leaves in the wind, enriching diaspora communities from New York to Buenos Aires with tailis whispered in family gatherings, the aroma of baklava evoking distant homelands. Yet, the human spirit endured. In the new Turkish Republic, women gained rights, their voices rising in schools and workplaces where the clatter of typewriters symbolized progress, though inequalities persisted in the shadows of reform. The Ottoman legacy permeated cultural realms, influencing art and literature where motifs of grandeur and decay inspired poets, reciting verses in cafes, the smoke curling like memories of bygone splendor. Politically, the fall exemplified the fragility of multi-ethnic empires in the age of nationalism. Lessons echoed in later dissolutions, like Austria-Hungary's. The era of Versailles heavy with similar fates. In the modern world, Ottoman architectural marvels like the Hagia Sophia stood as silent guardians, their domes arching over tourists whose footsteps traced paths once walked by sultans, blending reverence with curiosity. As the dust settled, the empire's end birthed a mosaic of states grappling with identities forged in fire. The Middle East's conflicts, often tracing roots to those post-war partitions where borders ignored tribal lands, and the whisper of winds carried unresolved tensions. Turkey's secular path under Ataturk'un inspired modernization efforts elsewhere, though authoritarian undercurrents lingered like unspoken secrets in government halls. The click of military boots, a reminder of power's allure. Reflecting on this epical rupture, one senses the inexorable tide of history, where empires rise on the waves of ambition only to crash against the shores of change, leaving behind fragments that shape the sands of time. The Ottoman fall serves as a haunting reminder of impermanence, its echoes reverberating in today's world where the scent of history mingles with the present, urging us to heed the quiet warnings before the storm. In the quiet aftermath, the world moved forward, but the phantom limbs of the empire persisted in the melodies of wood music, drifting through nights, in the intricate patterns of carpets woven with threads of memory, and in the resilient spirits of peoples who rebuilt from ruins. Their story is a testament to endurance amid irreversible transformation.